Welcome to Reddit Nightmares, where the darkest corners of the internet come to life. Tonight I'll be sharing 5 truly disturbing stories, tales of terror, mystery, and the unknown. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to be unsettled. When death approaches, it will not rise from the earth, nor will it be wearing a cloak or wielding a scythe. Death will arrive from a foreign land, bearing eyes like brilliant jades and hair the color of chestnuts, and it will broadcast only peace. In truth, it does not know what it delivers, but it will deliver it all the same. Little by little, step by step, it conjures apocalypse. A stranded leviathan. Angels' wings clipped. A curtain of night under a bejeweled sky. The demise of a king amidst a sweeping tempest. Finally, an inferno, wrathful and pure, spreading from sea to sea, cleansing mankind from this world. Listen closely, child. Once the inferno ignites, there will be no halting death's steady march. Excavate its jades from their hallowed sockets, and their visions of apocalypse will cease. Leave them be, and you will bear witness to the conflagration that devours humanity. Tell no one what you heard here today. What do you call a prophecy that is endlessly foretold but never actually comes true? Reminder after reminder after reminder, the words come, but they never bring anything else with them. Can you even call it a prophecy? I was 11 when I first heard the prophecy detailed above. Received my first letter a few weeks later, recounting the words to me in harsh red ink. No explanation, no return address. The cryptic message was disconcerting and unexplainable, but manageably so. It started as something I could rationalize into submission, quelling the terror by convincing myself it was all some extremely odd prank. That initial letter was just the beginning, though. Every avalanche has a first snowflake to fall, I guess. Honestly, I couldn't tell you how many times I've endured that series of words in that particular order over my lifetime. I'd probably ballpark the total to be hovering somewhere in the hundreds of thousands. That's a conservative estimate too. The damn thing has been like an infestation, each syllable a skittering termite gnawing through the folds of my brain, eating away the foundation, making my soul flimsy and brittle. That said, I think it's finally happening, and I'm afraid of what's coming. I'm terrified about what I might do, and I'm equally terrified about what might happen if I do nothing. Thus, I'm posting documentation of it all online. I need opinions external to the situation to help guide me. Unbiased review that will ground my actions firmly in reality from here on out. Though, if those words actually do predict a theoretical apocalypse, I suppose we're all internal to the situation, you lot are just a bit farther away from the epicenter. If memory serves, the whispers followed the letters and the calls followed the whispers. The reminders began small, but God did they escalate quickly. About half a year after the first letter arrived, the whispers started. Whenever I was in a crowded space like a subway car or a marketplace, delicate murmurs would curl into my ear. They had a sort of surround sound quality to them, warning me about the arrival of a green-eyed harbinger from every direction all at once, which made determining their point of origin basically impossible. The calls were next. Anytime I was home alone, the phone would invariably ring. When I answered, a deep, robotic voice on the other end would begin subjecting me to those words. I think I was 15 when that initial call came through. Believing the droning, tinny speech had to be pre-recorded, I said something like, "Oh, hilarious, asshole," expecting that the person playing the recording would start talking over it, slinging an insult or two back in my direction. But when I spoke, the voice immediately paused. Once a few seconds had passed, it simply resumed the prophecy where it left off, seemingly unbothered by the interruption. Stunned, I let the voice finish the entire thing, at which point it just started reciting the prophecy from the beginning again. One time, I picked up the call but set the phone down on a nearby couch cushion instead of reflexively hanging up, figuring that inducing boredom in my tormentor was the only real counteroffensive at my disposal. When I returned to the phone, nearly 3 hours later, I found that the voice was still going. I couldn't know for sure that they hadn't taken a break in their oration while I wasn't listening, but it sure as hell felt like they'd go on forever if I gave them the forum to do so. Not answering the phone was an option, but often it was just as stressful as answering, as the voice would just call non-stop until I picked up. Over time, I grew incredibly apprehensive of the shrill chiming of our telephone. The sound alone caused electric panic to gallop down the length of my spine. It was a lot for my young mind, and it only got worse as time went on. Letters started coming in weekly as opposed to monthly. The whispers made me anxious in public. The calls made anxious when I was alone. And despite the inescapable reminders, none of the prophecy came to pass. I began to wonder why my tormentors were putting so much effort into reminding me to be vigilant for signs of something that never seemed to actually happen. The inherent contradiction drove me up a fucking wall. Not only that, but I found it nearly impossible to confide in anyone about the harassment. Somehow, the idea of disclosing what was happening to me generated substantially more fear and anxiety than the actual torment did. On days where I'm feeling level-headed, I attribute that to conditioning. The last line of the prophecy, the favorite instrument of my tormentors, was, "Tell no one what you heard here today." After all, it would make sense that going against that deeply ingrained order may inspire an ill-defined but all-consuming terror to bloom within me. On days where I'm feeling not so level-headed, however, I find my mind going elsewhere. With logic out the window, I flirt with some more ethereal explanations, the likes of curses, cosmic decrees, voodoo. You get the idea. Even with all that, the situation was still manageable. Getting less manageable with each passing day, but I still felt like I had a handle on it. I could at least comprehend how this hyper-specific torment was possible. Imaging some weirdo getting his proverbial rocks off by reciting those godforsaken words at me in every way they could think of minimized the terror, made it undeniably human. Unfortunately, that rationalization could only stretch so far before it snapped. One afternoon, I was lounging in the living room, catching up on my favorite sitcom. Television was where I found peace and refuge. It functioned as an intermediary between being truly alone and being submerged in a crowd, both places where those words like to seethe and fester. My last bastion against the prophecy, glorious and impenetrable. But when the show flicked on, there she was. The abrupt premiere of a new character, one with chocolate-colored hair and mossy irises. An exchange student from across the Atlantic. In this family-friendly, strictly G-rated show, the cast of normally goofy characters despised the stranger. They acted repulsed by her in a way that I found deeply distressing, given the context. Called her names, ostracized her, gave her the cold shoulder, the works. As if that wasn't enough, the episode's narrative arc included all of the following: a bus crash, a dead bird, and a school blackout while fireworks lit up the heavens for the 4th of July. In other words, a stranded leviathan, an angel with clipped wings, and a curtain of night under a bejeweled sky. The exchange student didn't return in the follow-up installment, which resulted in an episode-long celebration of her departure. From what I remember, throwaway dialogue heavily implied that the protagonist killed her off-screen. Bewilderment overpowered me as I stood slack-jawed in front of the TV. It just wasn't possible. I prayed for it all to be the byproduct of some fucked-up fever dream, but if that's the case, I'm still very much waiting to wake up. From there, the prophecy was all avalanche and no snowflake. Elaborate graffiti that depicted a green-eyed harbinger overlooking a lake of fire now appeared on my walk to school. If I changed my path, the graffiti would eventually crop up somewhere along the alternative route. Lockerfuls of prophecy lines scribbled on small shards of paper would regularly spill out of the compartment when I opened it like a loose-leaf typhoon. On my grandmother's deathbed, I swear I heard her mutter little by little, step by step, "It conjures apocalypse," under her breath. Of course, I was the only one with her at the time. Let's just say my early 20s were a struggle. I never went to college, fearing that I would owe some explanation to my dorm mates for those intrusive words that I simply did not have. When my parents died, I became a bit of a recluse. Dark, lonely years that I'm happy to report did not last forever. The human brain really is an amazing machine. Given enough time, it can adapt to any set of circumstances, no matter how utterly inane. Eventually, I found myself progressively unbothered by the prophecy's frequent incursions. It's not like the parade of oddities was slowing down at the time either. I can recall plenty of commercials, fortune cookies, and skywriting during my 30s that can attest to that fact. But I realized the words couldn't hurt me in and of themselves, and the jade-eyed foreigner never materialized, so what was there to be afraid of? In the end, I had a life to live. I just decided to grow around the strangeness, like vines molding their expansion around a chain-link fence. Moved to the coast for work in my mid-30s, married my wife of now 20 years soon after. The reminders actually disappeared during that time. When they were finally gone, I hardly even noticed. Desensitization is a hell of a thing. But something dawned on me before I started typing this up. An association that I should have made a long time ago. The reminders only stopped once I returned to where I was infested with the prophecy in the first place. And now, a green-eyed, brown-haired stranger has moved in next door, and I feel like something awful is coming. Let me detail what I remember about meeting the seer and hearing the prophecy for the first time. I was 11, and my family's annual vacation to the coast had been decidedly uneventful up until that point. In fact, I really don't harbor any vivid memories from those trips other than that chance 5-minute encounter. Those 300 seconds remain seared into my consciousness, each minute detail painstakingly catalogued for further scrutiny and review. My recollection begins with me walking through the boardwalk arcade into a U-shaped room which housed all the pinball machines. It's almost closing time and there's no one else around. I'm sauntering from machine to machine, drinking in the vibrant lights and colors, dragging my hand across their cold metal bodies as I go. "Care to hear your fortune, my child?" a voice unexpectedly cooed. Startled, I leap back. My head swivels wildly, trying to locate whoever just spoke, but the room is still completely empty. In the silence, however, I hear something else. The faint thrumming of a harp, emanating from a space obscured by the chassis of a massive pinball machine in the very back of the room. Entranced by the airy melody, I cautiously pace forward. Wedged in the corner, I see a tall, odd-looking crate with a narrow, brightly lit window at the top. The crate itself was unlike anything I'd seen before, shaped like a telephone box, but made of weathered, splintering wood like a coffin. From behind the dusty plexiglass, someone or something repeats the question. "Care to hear your fortune, my child?" The voice is spilling from a disembodied face contained within a small, hollowed-out cubby, no bigger than a few square feet. Two miniature spotlights at the base of the compartment illuminate it. Crisp, gold typography above the window proclaims, "Bear witness to the seer, last of her kind." The face's skin is ivory-colored and inconsistently textured. Smooth and silken areas contrast with rough, creased ones, creating a patchwork appearance, almost as if someone stitched the finished product together using many different models. There is no scalp, head or skull to speak of, just a sliver of a face, thin and floppy like deli meat. Two horizontal slits are present where eyes should be, but the eyes themselves are absent. Instead, sickly white light explodes through the orifices from below. Four slick black fishhooks curve around its closed lips, two under the top lip, two under the bottom lip. Right before it speaks, the mechanical barbs violently crook the mouth open. In response, the face stretches unnaturally, forming an oblong cavity that nearly runs the entire length of the compartment. It seems to scream, but all that comes out is blinding light. I gaze into its dislocated jaw until I hear it recite those terrible words from the fathomless depths of its motionless mouth, and that's where my memory ends. Ari, a young Icelandic man, has been here for almost a week now. He's pleasant enough. Quiet and reserved, keeps to himself for the most part. Until today, I'd convinced myself his arrival was just a very unlucky coincidence. Something that was going to reopen scars, but nothing more damaging than that. However, I was sitting at the kitchen table having breakfast with Lucy this morning when Ari jogged by our dining room window, waving to the both of us as he did. My wife recoiled at the sight of him. "Everything okay, Lucy?" "Yeah, I'm alright. Just some bad memories." I felt my heart begin to thunder against the inside of my chest. "How do you mean?" She threw me a weak smile, and then her eyes started darting around the room. Lucy picked at her fingernails, clearly fighting back a wave of anxiety. "Oh, it's nothing, Meg. Really? I needed to say it." Agony attempted to sew my lips shut, but in the end, I needed to know those words meant nothing to her. For the first time in my life, I was the one reciting the prophecy. When the end approaches, it will not rise from the earth, nor will it be wearing a cloak or wielding a scythe. Death will arrive from a foreign land, bearing eyes like brilliant jades. As I spoke, I watched her pupils dilate and her features became swollen with dread. "How the fuck do you know those words?" I needed to say it. Agony attempted to sew my lips shut, but in the end, I needed to know those words meant nothing to her. For the first time in my life, I was the one reciting the prophecy. When the end approaches, it will not rise from the earth, nor will it be wearing a cloak or wielding a scythe. Death will arrive from a foreign land, bearing eyes like brilliant jades. As I spoke, I watched her pupils dilate and her features became swollen with dread. "How the fuck do you know those words?" In the catastrophic aftermath of Lucy's question, our passage through time seemed to have slowed to a crawl. Despite feeling as though an atom bomb had detonated in our home, the rest of the world appeared unaffected. The morning sun kept on soaking our kitchen in warm light, and the birds dawdling about our front porch kept on singing. All the while, we remained trapped within that moment of realization. Like a pair of primordial mosquitoes fossilized within a block of gleaming amber, we found ourselves stuck in time, immobilized by the thick layers of disbelief and confusion. I let the question linger around us unanswered. What was there for me to say? Look at it like this. There are only two reasons I would have those words memorized. Either we had stumbled upon an impossibly coincidental overlap in our life histories, or I was the one who had tormented her with the prophecy for nearly 2 decades, which is how long her harassment lasted. She quickly ruled out the latter, leaving only one explanation. Not only had we both suffered at the hands of that prophecy, but in our 23 years of marriage, it had remained unsaid. The odds of it felt dizzyingly astronomical. That's what really paralyzed us, I think, the infinitesimally small chance that this mutual history was a coincidence. And if it wasn't a coincidence, that meant there was a purpose behind our mirrored ordeals. And God, that mortified me. A loud thunk shattered our joint stasis, causing Lucy and me to realign chronologically with the rest of the world. I shot up and swung my body towards the noise. My wife slid back from the table, reflexively cocooning her face with both of her arms as protection from the unseen threat. By my estimate, the crash had originated from the square window above our dishwasher. The glass looked intact, but there was a new haziness at its center. A smudge where the unknown projectile had made contact. Lucy's eyes peeked out from her makeshift barrier. With her arms still up in a protective position, nervous brown irises flickered between me and the window, silently urging me to take the lead and find out what had happened. I've always known my wife to be skittish, and I assumed it was her natural temperament, but now I'm not so sure. Our relationship had been fundamentally reshaped by the discovery of our shared trauma. I knew how the prophecy's torment had affected me, but how had it affected Lucy? In an attempt at bravery, I tiptoed over to the window, pressing my face against the surface to determine if anything was laying below it. To my horror, with the glass fogging up from my rising hyperventilation, I saw something thrashing against the side of our home. A mangled ball of bright scarlet plumage accented by darker splatters of crimson blood. A cardinal had careened into our window and was now on the edge of death from its injuries. The same window that Ari, our green-eyed, chestnut-haired new neighbor, had waved at us through only 10 minutes prior. It wasn't alone either. Looking outside, hundreds of birds littered our suburban street, just not where you'd expect them. They weren't mid-flight or perched on nearby trees. Instead, myriads hopped aimlessly on the neighborhood's lawns and asphalt. Down the street, a jeep was laying on its horn, trying to get a cluster of the grounded animals to clear from the street. Judging by the state of its front tires, newly adorned with crumpled feathers and boggy viscera, the driver may have already accidentally run over a few of the songbirds, rightfully assuming that they would fly out of the way before being crushed. But none of them were flying. Not a single, solitary one of them was airborne. The words "angel's wings clipped" quietly curled into my ears, causing me to gasp. I hadn't noticed Meg creep up behind me, her head cautiously peering over my right shoulder as she muttered the phrase. A whispered prophecy, long forgotten, was now materializing in front of me, emerging from the catacombs of my memories like the vengeful undead. In a moment of uncharacteristic decisiveness, I purposed our next move. We need to go talk to Shep. Forget about the car, we'll probably have better luck biking to the station. Under normal circumstances, the off-season leaves our town rather quiet. The population of permanent residents is about 200. Summer, in comparison, attracts a decisive influx of tourists, particularly families. Parents looking to park their kids somewhere on the boardwalk so they can drink wine coolers on the beach. But once those transients clear out, it's back to just us permanents. We're a tight-knit bunch. Part of that comes from a shared love of the town. Most grew up around the area, visited the beach frequently when we were young. A lot of us found ourselves drawn back to the shore for good by its cool climate, magnetic nostalgia, and sense of community. The other key ingredient in our town's cohesiveness is that we all think alike as much as any large group of humans can, at least. There can't be any religious tensions if we're all similarly devout agnostics. 90% of us don't have kids, and the kids that did come from our community's gene pool are already fully grown and out in the world on their own. Because of that, our town doesn't have a lot of volatile young blood bubbling about, at least during the winter months. Limited spikes in sex hormones translates to limited hot-headed conflict, and we like it that way. None of us have the energy to down half a bottle of tequila while committing festive adultery as revenge for our partner for getting a birthday. We have our minor squabbles about politics here and there, but that's about as far as it goes. And on the rare occasion that there actually is conflict, we have Shepherd Langley. The police station lies at the very north end of town, though labeling it a station is very generous. Situated as the last stop on the boardwalk before it tapers off into sand, the unlabeled one-story building encrusted with peeling seafoam paint chips isn't much to write home about. The inside contains a single jail cell, a rifle rack that rarely actually has a firearm on it, and Shep's rickety wooden desk. But like I mentioned, when it's the off-season, there isn't exactly a need for policing. Sheriff Shepherd Langley, in a twist of irony, stands in stark contrast to his dilapidated, uninspired surroundings. Given the description of the station, I think you'd imagine our sheriff to be some ill-equipped, donut-totting weakling, and that would certainly fit better with the aesthetic. Thankfully, that isn't Shep. A room of a dozen Hollywood writers couldn't have designed a more stereotyped lawman. He's a gaunt but imposing, straight-shooting, no-nonsense type of guy. Always wearing boots with a bolo tie and soft-spoken to the point where it could be misinterpreted as complexity or mystique. In other words, he was exactly what we needed. Someone to counterbalance the downright absurdity that Lucy and I were experiencing. Bursting into the station, we found Shep crouched behind his desk, fiddling with the mechanics of a loose drawer. Instantly, we had his undivided attention. He seemed to sense our distress before he could look up to see it stitched across our faces. The sheriff stood, dusted himself off, and placed a weathered screwdriver into his pocket. We were huffing and puffing from our furious bike ride over, so he spoke first. "Meg, Lucy, everything all right? I get the sense that this isn't a social call." My wife and I exchanged uncertain glances as the door thumped shut behind us. In the delirious mania that resulted from that morning's escalating revelations, we had forgotten to discuss how to actually approach Shep with our concerns. I mean, where the fuck would we even start? Lucy, a better liar and improviser than I'll ever be, came up with something in a pinch. "Shep, we have been receiving some really strange calls to the house." He tilted his head as two thin gray eyebrows rose into his forehead, painting a look of confusion on his wrinkled face. Clearly, he was interested in what information would link some really strange calls and the two of us blustering into the station like a human monsoon. "Do tell, ma'am." A leaden gulp thumped from inside my wife's throat, and then she continued. "Well, essentially, someone's been calling day and night saying the same thing over and over again. You know that new guy, Ari? Moved to town after being hired to help manage the water refinery? Well, whoever is calling keeps saying that, that Ari might be dangerous. It's not the easiest thing to explain." The sound of the station door swinging open cut Lucy off, and a familiar nasal-toned voice began spilling into the room. "Oh, Sheriff, you won't believe it, the birds today. What a nuisance." The stocky woman nearly trampled me as she entered, so caught up in her carefully calibrated melodrama that she became blind to her surroundings. At the last second, I reflexively moved out of the collision course. The cornucopia of marble beads, crystals, and metal charms she wore around her neck clattered as she walked past me. It took her a moment to realize that she had intruded on another conversation. Barbara was here. Fucking goddamn Barbara. She turned her head from side to side, saw us, and then reluctantly trotted towards a chair in the corner opposite to Shep's desk that effectively functioned as the station's waiting room. "Ladies, I apologize for the interruption. I'm a bit wound up today. Barb is wound up 365 days a year without fail. Her perpetual tizzy is one true constant in a world of ever-changing variables. Please continue. I can wait." She sat down, folded her arms onto her lap, and stared ahead, statuesque and unmoving. Out of all the denizens in our pleasant, cooperative town, Barb is the one exception. She's living proof that zealotry and dogma are by no means exclusive to the religious among us. Even atheist, supposedly nature-loving Reiki experts can be destructive, malignant narcissists. Shep quietly nodded in Barb's direction, cataloging her existence, and then turned his stoic gaze back on us. Hesitantly, I picked up where Lucy left off, eager to get to the meat of it all. "Listen, Shep. I'm going to iterate to you what the voice keeps saying, and you can decide how concerned you are. Sound good?" He nodded again, and I continued. "When death approaches, it will not rise from the earth, nor will it be wearing a cloak or wielding a scythe. Death will arrive from a foreign land, bearing eyes like brilliant jades and hair the color of chestnuts, and it will broadcast only peace. In truth, it does not know what it delivers, but it will deliver it all the same. Little by little, step by step, it conjures apocalypse. A stranded leviathan. Angels' wings clipped. A curtain of night under a bejeweled sky. The demise of a king amidst a sweeping tempest. Finally, an inferno, wrathful and pure, spreading from sea to sea, cleansing mankind from this world. Listen closely, child. Once the inferno ignites, there will be no halting death's steady march. Excavate its jades from their hallowed sockets, and their visions of apocalypse will cease. Leave them be, and you will bear witness to the conflagration that devours humanity. Tell no one what you heard here today." As I was finishing detailing the prophecy to Shep, Lucy curved her body towards mine, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Her newly patronizing tone, however, immediately soured the soothing gesture. "Sweetheart, I think you got one part wrong. I believe the voice has been saying, 'Listen closely, child. Once the inferno ignites, there will be no halting death's steady march. Dissect a portion of their liver like the eagle to Prometheus, and their apocalypse will crumble star. Just then the phone on Shep's desk rang. He waved a single index finger in front of us and then picked up the line, silently asking us to pause. In our haste, not only had we arrived at the station without a definitive plan, Lucy and I also didn't make sure our prophecies 100% matched. We knew the first few sentences did, but we wrongly assumed that would mean that all of it would be identical. "Lucy, what the fuck are you talking about? That's definitely not right," I muttered under my breath, trying to make the words only audible to her. Barb was a notorious snoop and a known instigator of rumors. I wasn't looking to have her interpret my tone as marital discord. It was ammunition I sure as shit was not willing to give to her freely, at least. That's what mine was. "Meg, at the arcade, from the whispers in the letters, does it really not match what you were told?" I was shell-shocked. Her recollection of the prophecy was nearly interchangeable, except where it seemed to matter most. Somehow, we were given different instructions on how to avert apocalypse. Before I could come up with a response, Barb mumbled something behind us that made my blood run cold. "Actually, you're both wrong. It ends up with, sever their dominant hand, loosening their grip on apocalypse asterisk. Across the room, Shep slammed the phone down on the receiver. "Sorry y'all, this will have to wait. There's a whale carcass that washed up by 44th. Well, at least they think it's dead. I need to go take a look. Have to decide whether or not we need environmental to come out, too." 3 words spun in my head, causing overwhelming vertigo. Those words were then joined by what Barb uttered, and I felt myself passing out. A stranded leviathan. If someone subjected Barb to the prophecy as well, there's no way any of this is a coincidence. How many more of us are there, then? When death approaches, it will not rise from the earth, nor will it be wearing a cloak or wielding a scythe. Death will arrive from a foreign land, bearing eyes like brilliant jades and hair the color of chestnuts, and it will broadcast only peace. In truth, it does not know what it delivers, but it will deliver it all the same. Little by little, step by step, it conjures apocalypse. A stranded leviathan. Angels' wings clipped. A curtain of night under a bejeweled sky. The demise of a king amidst a sweeping tempest. Finally, an inferno, wrathful and pure, spreading from sea to sea, cleansing mankind from this world. Listen closely, child. Once the inferno ignites, there will be no halting death's steady march. Excavate its jades from their hallowed sockets, and their visions of apocalypse will cease. Leave them be, and you will bear witness to the conflagration that devours humanity. Tell no one what you heard here today. The sight of the stranded leviathan was beyond surreal. Shep left the truck first, whistling with awe as his boots hit the sand. Meanwhile, I sat frozen in the passenger's seat, fixated on the impossible scene only 30 yards down the beach from us. Nervous sweat poured from my entire body, dripping down and pooling into the upholstery of the sheriff's car. No matter how many times I blinked, wishing it away, it was still there. The crisp snap of fingers broke my trance. "Meg, hey, where'd you go?" My neck spun towards the noise. With a look of irritation painted on his face, Shep stood outside the passenger's side window, impatiently waiting for me to respond. His face softened as I turned toward him, now wearing an expression of concern more than one of annoyance. When I caught a reflection of myself in the side view mirror, I understood why. My skin lacked color, drained of blood until it sported a dull yellow-white hue like that of an elephant tusk. My pupils were wide and dilated, making my eyes look like 2 white olives with dark black pimentos. I was the picture of mind-shattering fear. Truthfully, I thought I was doing a better job of hiding my emotions than I actually was. Not wanting him to worry too much more, I sent him away. "Yeah, I'm alright, Shep. I'll meet you out there in a few minutes, okay? I need some space to get my head on straight." He nodded slowly and then walked off towards the beach Titan. Already, our makeshift plan was falling apart. The division of responsibilities had made sense in the moment. Lucy would stay behind with Barbara to keep her calm. I would go with Shep to tell him more about the prophecy, while also seeing if the whale seemed to fit the criteria for a stranded leviathan. But paralytic terror was preventing me from doing either task. I couldn't force the questions out of my mouth on the ride over to the beach, so it was completely silent. And now, I couldn't force my legs to bring me closer to the stranded leviathan. Inspecting it up close may not provide us with important insight, but I wouldn't know that until I looked at it myself. Maybe I should have stayed with Barb. I bet Lucy would have been out of the car by now. The more I thought about it, though, the more I realized this was the only functional distribution of labor. I can't handle the vortex of Barb's self-obsession on her best days, let alone today. As I considered the notion that my paralysis was akin to failing my wife, a tiny ember of self-loathing started burning in my chest. Knowing that depreciation might be my only way out of this car, I billowed that ember with everything I had. You're being such a piece of shit, Meg. You're still that kid listening to the prophecy over the phone and not hanging up. Get the fuck up, you doormat. My body exploded into action, inner revulsion melting away the paralysis. I threw the car door open and started sprinting towards Shep and the Leviathan, twisting my ankle as I did, but I ignored the pain. I hoped Lucy was faring better than I was. It might not seem like it, but she probably had the important assignment. A few summers ago, we had a spree of teenagers ringing doorbells and then running off. No defacement of public property, no burglaries, no assault, no evidence that anyone was in any danger. It was just some dumb kids blowing off steam. Barb did not see it that way, however. She feared that the criminality was bound to escalate. It was just a matter of when. As a result of that fear, the woman blasted a UPS delivery man with duckshot as she answered the doorbell, thinking he was one of the instigators. Thankfully, the worker was mostly unharmed. Barb is not marksman and the ammunition itself was rubber. She got off light, a few hefty fines and probation. Paid for the man's medical bills too. Fear can make you a lot of things. It causes me to become paralyzed. Causes Lucy to run and hide. Both aren't exactly healthy responses, but they aren't particularly harmful either. Barb is a different story. Fear makes her impulsive and violent. The adrenaline is blinding. It transforms her into a person recklessly swinging a knife around in a dark room just because she can't see anything around her. Uncontrolled fear is a cancer. It grows into everything around it, overriding whatever was there before it as its roots dig deep. If more than just the three of us have been affected by the prophecy, I'm afraid of what voracious cancer Barb might be able to cultivate. By the time I reached the animal, Shep was already on the phone with environmental services. From what I could tell, he was getting a cleanup crew out to the shore as soon as possible to retrieve the carcass. Standing before the stranded Leviathan, the smell of death lingered thickly in the air, the salt of the tide and the sulfur of decay combining to form an ungodly stench. Closer to the omen, I expected my fear to intensify. Instead, I found that it quieted, and a peculiar sadness took over in its place. The majestic animal had died in such an undignified way, sprawled out alone on the beach for everyone to gawk at. It was hard to look at. I did a lap around the dead titan. Wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but I figured I'd know it when I see it. To my relief, there wasn't anything overtly foreboding about the cadaver. No prophetic phrases carved into its flesh, no mysterious pagan symbology painted onto it, nothing to link it to those damned words other than its arrival alongside the other potential omen, the grounded birds. But then I saw something that caught my eye. There was a patch of blackened skin on its underside, partially hidden by the way it had washed up on the shore. The pungent smell kept me from placing my head too close to the scorch mark, but from a few feet away, it looked like an electrical burn. I took a quick snapshot with my phone as Shep began calling to me from the other side of the mammal. "You all right over there, Megan?" he hollered, realizing he had lost track of me while he was on the call. Before I could respond, he jogged around the corpse until he found me, clearly more than a little concerned about my state of mind. "So, is this your stranded Leviathan?" he asked, with a tiny lilt of sarcasm flavoring his speech. Suppressing a twinge of embarrassment, I shook my head in the affirmative. "For the first time in my life, yes, I honestly think so." He focused his gaze on me. "What do you mean, your life? I thought these calls you and Lucy had been receiving were new?" His questions lacked even a modicum of confusion. He spoke with strong, decisive language, giving me the impression that he just confirmed a hunch. Apparently, Shep had seen through our lie from the very beginning, or at least had his doubts. "Look, Shepard, we didn't give you the whole truth because the whole truth is absolutely bat's it." A small chuckle escaped his lips and I continued. "I'll give you the full story, but I need to ask a favor first." He walked closer, placing a firm but reassuring hand on my shoulder. "And what would that be, ma'am?" I struggled to contain the fear that was once again bubbling in my stomach. For Lucy's sake, I pushed on. "Could you drive me over to the arcade on the boardwalk? There's something I want to show you. Everything will make more sense if it's still there." A flick of the wall light bathed the boardwalk's underground storage room in a faint yellow light. The basement smelled intensely damp, almost fungal. Its scent was stagnant and putrid, like a mausoleum that had been newly unsealed for the first time in a century. The room lacked any methodical organization. Clearly, the town added broken or retired items to the basement without forethought. The result, unfortunately, was that the area looked more like a junkyard than a storage space. Shep stood in front of me, surveying the disarray with almost as much amazement as he did the whale corpse. From my vantage on the last descending step of the narrow staircase, I had a little elevation to help me orient myself to the room's congested architecture. "Can you spot the fortune-telling machine from where you are?" Shep asked. "Remember, someone may have thrown that thing out years ago." I scanned the room, trying to identify the shape of that windowed crate against the veritable cityscape of refuse. My eyes danced over a half-disassembled bumper car, a snow cone machine that was tipped forward on account of missing its front wheels, and stacks of old signage from businesses that have long since gone extinct. But so far no luck. "Not yet, but this ain't exactly easy," I sighed. "Well, if you can't see it from where you are, I think we'll have to call this a wash. I don't want you digging through the garbage." "That's an easy way to throw out a back or contract tetanus," he replied. I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket, but I didn't let it distract me. I needed to find this damn thing. Even if it didn't help clarify what was going on, it might help convince Shepard that everything I told him on the way over was real, rather than some bizarre manifestation of childhood trauma. To Shep's credit, he listened intently to what I had to say, seemingly without judgment or scrutiny. That said, he was skeptical of the events that I had described. He was right to be skeptical, even if his disbelief stung. Memories, he reminded me, aren't true history. They're more like made-for-TV movies based on historical events. Truth is the foundation, but that foundation is often buried under layers of emotion, flawed retrospect, and new context as you age. You can't look at memories like they're fact, he said, especially ones that are that old. Important insight that would only become more crucial as the events of the evening unfolded. Just then I saw it. The bottom half of a wrinkled face framed behind plexiglass, barely visible from under nautical props that used to be part of a popular mini-golf course. "There!" I screamed, pointing a tremulous finger at the apparition from my childhood. Shep followed the trajectory of my gesture, and locked his eyes onto what I saw. It took him a few minutes, but he was eventually able to drag the machine out from the rubble. Once Shepard had placed the box in front of me, I knew it was the right one. But it was so different from what I remembered. First off, the material that made up the crate wasn't jagged and splintered, like coffin wood. Instead, it was actually cheap plastic painted to look like driftwood. Not only that, but the face in the window was not nearly as haunting as I recalled. The skin was tattered and gray-blue like I remembered, but the expression was neutral and unoffensive. A little uncanny, sure, but not demonic or supernatural like the memory that lived in my head. I remembered one thing correctly. The plastic machine displayed "The Last Great Seer" embroidered in gold typography above its face. "This is it? This is what has you and Lucy so freaked out?" Shep asked, dubious that so much fear could be born out of such a benign-looking contraption. I ignored his question, instead asking, "Is there any way to turn it on?" He spun his head around the perimeter of the machine and found that the power cord was still present and intact. "Sure, Meg. Let me see if this old devil still runs." The sheriff started looking for a power outlet. As he did, I felt warm comfort drip slowly into my veins. I carefully inspected the box. There was no way this ancient thing could really have given us so much heartache. Maybe this is all just a terrible coincidence. I mean, Barbara grew up around this town too. It's possible that she experienced the prophecy from this machine early in her childhood, the same as we did. It didn't fully explain what was going on with the birds, nor the stranded Leviathan, and it certainly didn't explain the motives of our shared tormentors, but those loose threads didn't mean an apocalypse was on its way, hot on the heels of our kind Icelandic neighbor. The only thing I noticed that was a bit odd was a small T-shaped hole on the back of the machine. If I didn't know any better, I'd say it looked like where you'd plug a landline into. Almost like someone could have used the animatronic fortune teller as a phone. As if in response to my internal rationalizations, something abruptly plunged the storage area into complete darkness. "Damn buggy wiring," Shep said from somewhere deeper within the blackness. "Meg, you still on that last step? Can you flick the light and see if it comes back on?" "Yep, I'm on it." I carefully leaned forward, gripping the banister with one hand while sliding the other up and down the surface of the wall to my right, looking for the switch. Eventually, I found it and I began moving it up and down. The knob clicked, but no light came to our aid. "No luck, Shep." I reached my hand out until I found the sheriff's shoulder, and I guided him safely back onto the stairs. Once we got back to the ground level, a pounding terror ripped into my torso. The top of the stairs dumped us out in front of the boardwalk. In the time we had been in the storage area, twilight had transitioned into a moonless night. But it shouldn't have been as dark as it was. The boardwalk is littered with street lamps that automatically come on before sunset. But just like the storage area, they were all empty of light. Shep climbed out of the stairway behind me, swearing as he did. He had noticed something in the sky, opposite to the direction I was looking. My lord, what in the living fuck is that? When I turned around, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The blue-green light reflected damningly off of Shepard's wide eyes, confirming my worst fears. Above us, there were gleaming, twisting sheets of cosmic light. I counted 5 separate bars, each of them the size of multiple football fields. They were primarily aquamarine, accented by some smaller flecks of indigo. It reminded me of the aurora borealis, but we sure as shit weren't in the Great North. I couldn't hold back the words. It felt like withholding an exhale. If I didn't let it spill out of me, I was liable to suffocate. A curtain of night under a bejeweled sky. In a flash, I remembered Lucy was under the same sky. But not with me. She was with Barb. I wrenched my phone out of my pocket, the heavens tinting the screen ghostly neon colors as I saw what I ignored while searching for the last great seer. 4 missed calls from Lucy, followed by a text message and a picture. Barb gathered nearly everyone at the chapel except Ari. Practically everyone in town was tormented by the prophecy when they were young. They're all acting crazy. What they're talking about doing is insane. Come ASAP and bring Shep. Although none of us are religious, we use an abandoned Pentecostal church as our town hall. It's the biggest communal space we have. The picture was hazy and out of focus, which I took to mean that Lucy had taken it in secret. There was a white board next to the pulpit which was covered in things like, "Excavate its jades from their hallowed sockets, and their visions of apocalypse will cease. Remove eyes." 5 tally marks next to it. "Excise the bull's manhood and apocalypse will fall." Castration, 2 tally marks. "Flay its carapace and apocalypse will be exposed." Skinning, 4 tally marks. The list went on and on. Standing at the pulpit, I could clearly see Barb, eyes burning with frenzy, hands gesturing wildly toward the pews.